Dr. Bill Adams here, and we have a No Spin Live special edition. This is an update. We've been with this group of great experts for a number of weeks now. So guys, again, Dr. Charles Randquist from Stockholm, Sweden. Charles, Dr. Dave Sieber from San Francisco, California, lockdown city #1 in the United States. And last but not least, Dr. Tom Wiener from just south of me in Houston, Texas. Tom.
We're doing good.
You got the Astro Street shirt on there. That's there you go. All right. Well, listen, Charles, I'll start with you. You know, again, Sweden, update us. You guys have taken the different approach, but it seems to be working well. There's a number of publications I've seen coming out in the past few days, just really praising Sweden for doing as well as you have. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, like we've been saying early on, we don't have all the facts, we don't have all the data, we don't have all the numbers, and we've been taking quite a lot of heat for the last couple of weeks. But the government and the so-called academic advising the government still believes in the concept. Have we taken a toll? Absolutely. Healthcare staff, are they working extremely hard? Is a healthcare system stretched? Absolutely yes. Have we lost more lives than most of our neighbors this far into the pandemic? Yes, that's true. At the same time, the curve seems to flatten. We seem to have less affected. So far we've had 916 mortalities, but it seems to flatten. And everything is indicating that we've had quite a few of our citizens affected by the COVID-19, including myself actually. Last 2 weeks ago, I started feeling a little bit nauseous, a slight headache. I didn't think a lot about it. A lot of work right now. A week ago, Sunday, I got more headache. I woke up Monday morning, muscle ache, a fever. And I put myself on hydroxychloroquine, 200 milligrams twice a day for 5 days, and azithromycin, 500 milligrams once a day for 5 days, and zinc sulfate, 220 milligrams. And on day 3, everything changed, and I started feeling great again. So the fever went away, headache went away. I had some bowel distress. I didn't have any severe cough, no sneezing, nothing. And on day 5, basically, I was okay. I still don't have any, I can't smell anything. I've lost the sense of smelling, but otherwise I feel good and basically asymptomatic now since 3 days. And for me, that's been important because I've been reading studies like all of you guys and reading these studies coming out showing that this doesn't work. Those ones that I've read showing that this doesn't work has been cases who received this type of treatment, as I feel at least, too late in their disease. They already had pneumonia and were already in ICU. I think this is a treatment like with the malaria, prophylactic really, or get into an early state. At least I think I'm a living proof of that. And I've got my chronic obstructive lung disease, and that's why I acted so fast, wanting to avoid that situation, obviously being one of those in the risk zone. So what we feel now is, and by the way, my wife is also affected and my daughter, but they have very few signs. And so we feel that's been the situation for most of the population in Stockholm, which is where pandemia like in New York really started, and now it's traveling all over the country. But we've got the feeling that most of, or quite a few of the population have been affected, and we've stretched the healthcare system, but now it's fading. The difference that I feel reading the articles and looking at the news worldwide is there's a different emotion among our population. I definitely feel we have not been as traumatized. We don't feel this is a plague or that we're doomed. It's a much more positive ambience just because we have not had to endure a lockout for 4, 6, 8 weeks. We feel our economy is still quite okay. And kids have been going to school, playing around with their friends. So I dare to say this: if there's one thing I feel after all these weeks, is that we as a nation are more whole and more positive than I think a lot of other nations that have been severely traumatized by the incident. So far so good, and hopefully within a couple of weeks we'll have data showing that a lot of our population, a lot of the people in our country are immune, at least in Stockholm, where we've had the pandemic for quite some time, and I'll be one of them testing myself, and numbers will tell.
Charles, I think that your comments about the vibe is really interesting, because I think the vibe, I would say, in the United States is still very guarded. People are, watching the media and social media, and so I would say the vibe is not overall positive in the United States.
Hey, Charles, a question for you. You said that the early death toll in Sweden is higher than surrounding countries that have more severe lockdowns. Do you think that is caused by the fact that since more Swedes are out and about, more get it early, so that death rate occurs, or the number of deaths occur earlier? However, in those countries that have prolonged lockdowns, although that curve is not going to be quite as high early, it's going to be a more extended curve, like they were discussing, to try to not overwhelm the hospitalization or hospital usage. However, that longer term and that decreased herd immunity that has now occurred in those other countries may actually create a larger total number of deaths in those countries.
I'm quite confident about exactly that. I mean, the reason initially for these lockdowns is obviously, we've all been speaking about, is to avoid the peak and therefore the stress on the healthcare system. But if one is able to cope with the peak and have these cases in a shorter period, at the same time having their herd immunity developed in a country, of course, hopefully we have the best of both worlds. Long term, I'm pretty sure our numbers will not be higher than any other country's numbers. If anything, probably less, because there's a consequence long term we haven't been speaking about. It's called fatigue. And when a disease is in a society for a long time, there will be a fatigue within the healthcare staff and then within the system. And you won't be as careful, you won't be as on your toes as you are initially. So personally, I believe in taking it right now, being at your best right now, and not stretching the healthcare, and by doing that, avoiding a lot of the things that I do believe will occur over time. So no, I actually believe we'll have less over time than compared to a lot of other countries, because they most likely will have a second, third, and fourth wave. And we're already seeing the second wave hitting a lot of countries that are closing down again. And you cannot avoid this unless you have a vaccination, and there won't be a vaccination for quite some time. So I believe you're absolutely right, Tom, sadly.
So Dr. Dave Sieber, I'm going to go to you, because you've been talking in the past episodes about antibody testing and how that adds a lot of good science and data. So update us where we are in antibody testing, what kind of data has recently come out.
There's a lot of people looking into antibody testing. The two biggest groups are doing it right now. There's a group at Stanford in correlation with UCLA, who are they randomly tested, I don't remember how many thousands of people. That data will hopefully be available within the next few days, hopefully sometime this week, so we can see what the percentages actually are. The NIH also said that they're going to start doing a study. They're going to test 10,000 people using a laboratory that's near me in Richmond to see, again, what the number of people who are actually infected are. There was also a study recently out of Germany where it's a smaller town in Germany. I don't remember the exact city, but they tested the city and found that the number of people infected was actually 14%. which correlates with some of the other more controlled areas we have. So there's a lot of worry about the antibody testing because the government did allow them to come out a little bit faster. So we don't know the sensitivity and specificity of some of the tests that might come to market. So that is one thing we need to keep in mind, is that we might have tests now, but we don't know how well they actually work. I think there's been 1 or 2 companies that have been FDA approved. One of them is Cellex. And I think there might be one other one for these antibody testings. But these results are really going to give us all the information we need. It's going to give us a better idea of how many people actually have had the virus. And then it's also going to give us a much better idea of what the actual mortality rate is. So it's going to be very interesting to see what this data is. Most of the studies I've read account for a huge underestimation of actual numbers.
And Tom, so to segue onto that, you've been really great about summarizing the known data for us through the past 3 to 4 weeks. So update us what your thoughts are, and especially with regard to what Dave just talked about.
I think one of the early concepts, or one of the concepts we hear thrown about, is that we're fighting a war. And you've seen this in the media, you've seen this with politicians, and I guess it's true. But I think that for a lot of people, it's not clear who the enemy is. What some people say is the war is between lives versus money. That's not it at all. In reality, our army is lives and livelihood versus the virus and ignorance. So that's really the war that we're fighting. So, and what that means is that we get into the issue of the current numbers as far as the isolation or the current treatment or prevention protocols of isolating the population. How much do we isolate? Is it total isolation? Everyone is locked down, or is it selective isolation of the at-risk group until a vaccine is developed? And once again, even though all of my fellow physicians have just mentioned that it's going to be quite some time before a vaccine is developed, once again, that Israeli vaccine, because they were ahead of the game, it looks like that may be out in a few months. But importantly, total isolation will work to stop the virus right up until the isolation is ended. And then everything goes haywire. We talk about the second and third wave because there's a resurgence, because herd immunity has been lessened by isolating more of the population. And the economy also takes a bigger hit because everything is shut down. It may take years longer to recover. And some estimates right now are that 25% of small businesses in the United States are going to close permanently. And over half the businesses in the United States are small businesses. That's a massive hit to the economy and to lives and to livelihood. So selective isolation, in other words, isolating only the high-risk group and those with susceptible comorbidities, lets the younger, healthy population go back to work. Young kids go back to school, all with social distancing, of course, hand washing and all of that. This allows herd immunity to develop until we do get a vaccine for the at-risk group. And in reality, if you think about this, this is sort of what we're actually doing. People are going to the grocery store. People are going to the hardware store. This is not, even though people think that this is total lockdown, it's not total lockdown. Herd immunity has already been developing. Like Dave said, like Charles said, and Bill, this has already been running through the country. There was the study from Stanford that indicates that COVID-19, the virus, was actually in the population in early December. So that's why they feel that this herd immunity, that their peak, which we all heard of a month ago, the peak was going to hit 2 weeks after that, and it was going to be huge. All hospitals across the U.S. are going to be overwhelmed. That didn't happen. There are a few select hospitals overwhelmed. New York, 1 or 2, but importantly, the hospital ship in New York Harbor, and also the large tent facility in New York, which were the overflow facilities, have only taken 100 patients. So the hospitals themselves, 1 or 2 hospitals, are very busy. but it's not overwhelming the system outside of that. So what do we really isolate, and what's the difference that people are going to a grocery store, going to a hardware store? What's the difference between a grocery store and sitting in a pizza restaurant as long as you're assuming social distancing? Why shut down that pizza restaurant? Why close down so much of the economy? If it's already returned to business and it's just not full scale, we're just not admitting it right now. So those that argue that herd immunity doesn't work until you get 40 to 60% of the population immune, that's only partially true. With any kind of issue like herd immunity, as the percentage increases from 0 to 40 to 60%, you're still getting protection as the growth increases in herd immunity. So it's an important point, and this is why Sweden is actually going to end up, I think, doing extremely well. So you let just like we're in a war. So in a war, what we don't do is we don't lock down the whole army. All right, we let the strong go to war to protect the weak and the at-risk population. So letting the low-risk group go back to work, protecting the high-risk groups, validated by studies showing that the difference in mortality between low and high-risk groups. So a study out of China published in Lancet showed a mortality rate for those under 60 years old of 0.3%. And these numbers are old, so it's probably less by now. For those over 60, mortality was 6.4%. Those over 80, 13.4% mortality. So you let that low-risk population go back to work, salvage the economy, build herd immunity, because they are far less likely to die. So that's really what we need to be doing.
You know, it's interesting how numbers keep on changing, and how these numbers are being changed without being questioned strongly. How could you say this? Just a couple of weeks ago, they were talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people dying in the States, and now this is being changed. And we're realizing now that most likely the mortality rate with this COVID-19 won't be much higher than the 0.1% that we've seen with other viruses. And we were initially talking about that maybe 10, maybe 20 in one were unaffected. And now we're talking about numbers 20 to 40 being unaffected for everyone that's affected, showing symptoms of this virus. So I think what's happening right now is that we're realizing that those dramatic measurements governments have taken on us actually might not have been the best of the interest of the citizens. And I dare to say, Tom, yes, you're talking about economy, you're talking about lives. I dare to say, let's talk about democracy also. You know, when you wake up one day, you have no business to go back to, no income, and suddenly those numbers you were told, which made you believe that staying indoors with all your neighbors were the right things, you go out there, you have nothing. Who are you going to question and who you're going to blame? So I think our next, we're not fighting a pandemic on coronavirus, we're fighting an ignorance and stupidity, to be quite honest. And that doesn't mean that Sweden is right. I'm just saying that the way people have been acting and governments have been acting out of fear, letting emotions run this show, I think will be a very, very strong lesson to all of us, where we need to bring science back and news or fake news through the back door.
Like you were saying about the numbers keep decreasing. So we have all these prediction models. The prediction models in February were saying that there was going to be, like you said, 200,000 deaths. And the most recent one is 60,000. In California, they had originally predicted like 6,500. Now that's down to like around 1,000. And going back to data, I mean, this all has to do, and we've discussed these models. And when these people put together these models and with insufficient data, you really get numbers that are all over the place. I think during our first one, there was even one one prediction where there was a spread of like 300,000 people. It was between, these models are all over the place. And I just hope that as we get more testing, we can get more data to really plug in the numbers where they're supposed to be in the equation to give us an answer that really actually makes sense.
And what's really interesting is that we didn't really learn a lesson from a previous episode. This is from the CDC, and this has to do with what are we doing and what does herd immunity really mean? So we all remember the H1N1 flu 2009 and how little we really heard about it. There was not a lockdown, there was not a total shutdown of the economy. So the swine flu began in April of 2009. A vaccine wasn't developed until November 2009 and didn't get out into the public until December. However, the infections and deaths had already peaked before the vaccine had been developed. Okay, and the H1N1 was pretty aggressive. And it was felt, the analysis since then is felt that because herd immunity had developed, just like we're seeing now, and all of the reports now coming out, increasing in strength, that more people have been exposed, more people are developing antibodies. And once again, with the H1N1 flu, interestingly enough, and I don't know why we didn't hear about it back then, 80% of the deaths with these H1N1, the swine flu in 2009, were those in 65 years old or younger. Yeah. Because the older age group was partially immune from previous H1N1 infections, including the 1918 Spanish flu, which was an H1N1 flu. We didn't learn our lesson. So if we had looked at 2009 and looked at the swine flu, we would have seen that let herd immunity work. And it's, thank God, it's working right now.
Well, Tom, it's interesting you should say that because the reason the Stanford investigators wanted to do this study looking at the general population that already has antibodies is because when they looked at the data, the population of California is 40 million, but the number of people who are either hospitalized in ICUs or are infected is way lower than what we're seeing in New York City. And the investigators theorized that, kind of like we talked about, that this is the second wave we're actually seeing now, that the first wave probably came over in December. People have developed immunity to it. And that's why these numbers in California are so much lower than you're seeing in some other parts of the country. My mom, who was in Northern Italy in October, it was probably there in October, came back from Northern Italy and had all of the symptoms all throughout November. And that's, in the US already. So I suspect there's a lot of people, once we get this antibody testing, who don't get symptoms with this wave, but test positive for antibodies.
Yep, agreed.
We have to understand, Wuhan is one of the hubs in China, and a lot of people. And before Christmas, a lot of Chinese were Christmas shopping, not just in Milan. They were definitely also in New York and London. And it's interesting how we see the pandemic. It went from Milan. It was already in Europe in December. It's not like the Chinese were not traveling in December before Christmas. Now, I want to throw out something to you. We're physicians, and this is not the way I normally discuss things, but I have to ask myself, how is it possible that this is actually happening the way it's happening right now? If this really comes down as a more regular flu, with the numbers we anticipate they will be, how was it possible that this could create the attention and the fear it has, and who's profiting from this? Well, how is this possible?
Yeah, well, I think we know the answer to that because we've seen it in other areas of even our specialty, and it has to do with media, and it has to do with social media and the spread, not of the virus, but of misinformation. The spread of misinformation is rampant now. 20 years ago, you didn't have this problem because there was not this medium for things to spread like it does now. And I think that's clearly, I always say, social media is a gong show with my kids because they're on it all the time, but that's just one thing. But globally, I'm not sure that social media is net positive for society.
This is why in 2009, we didn't see this hysteria with the swine flu in 2009, because social media was not nearly as pervasive. Now it's a different story. It's instant information, instant hysteria. Every death is counted on social media right then and there, and you see it in broad daylight. That wasn't the way it was in 2009.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, obviously we're not here to bash anybody or certainly mainstream media, but mainstream media has changed. Even 20 years ago, I think that they're much more about reporting facts and really doing research. And now it's about the click rate, how much clickbait can you get out there and sensationalized stories. And again, fear mongering, because that's what brings in viewers. And we've seen this in our specialty, even in the near future. You know, we've seen this, and we're not going to get into that now, but we've seen this and we understand it, and this is no different.
And it's interesting. How is it possible? I mean, we've been doing this for quite some years. How is it possible that a rumor, once it's mentioned enough times, becomes the truth? How is that possible?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like someone is hitting us constantly right in our face. Wake up, guys. Hello. And I mean, I'm old. I've been doing this, for quite some time now, but I'm just scared. If this is what happens with what I think is quite a regular virus, what will happen in the coming years?
There's an estimate right now that the world economy is going to take at least a $1 to $2 trillion hit. And if it extends, it's going to take more of a hit. That's lives, that's livelihoods, that's family businesses shuttered. Those are lives destroyed. And we need to think about that.
But there will also be quite a few people who will make a lot of money.
True.
One thing definitely that I foresee is that the healthcare, which is already very inefficient, using a lot of our money, will ask for more money, and obviously we'll get that. But that doesn't bring more efficientness into the system. It's just going to be a bigger machine. And definitely pharma will benefit from this, and a lot of other, surveillance and all of that. But the small man, the guy out there on the street, no, he won't profit from this.
Right.
I do think we're going to see more innovation. I mean, if you look back in 2008 during the crisis, then there was a lot of people who were very smart, who were very innovative, that came up with new ideas, like Uber and some of these other companies were kind of invented during this time when things weren't good. They came out with solutions to fix problems that weren't working very well. And I just hope that we continue to do that. I'm excited to see what people come up with during this time too.
No, you're very right, David, because it gives people time to reflect. And that's a very expensive commodity in our society today. So yes, I agree with you.
That's awesome stuff, guys. We'll do another one later this week. If you want to see more of this, you can see it on the plasticsurgerychannel.com.